Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice is a third-person puzzle game with an action elements created by Ninja Theory, the makers of Heavenly Sword, Enslave Odyssey to the West, and the underrated DMC reboot. The combat was awesome in that one. They created the critically acclaimed game Hellblade. Critics and gamers praised their new IP, so I decided to try it out a few years later. So is it any good? Personally, I would say yes. However, it would be more for the experience and story rather than the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, the gameplay's solid. I just hope they tweak it a little for the upcoming sequel. Hellblade tells the story of Senua who travels to Helheim to find her dead soulmate, and it's a long journey to go there. It kind of reminds me of a mix of God of War and Dante's Inferno. In fact, I was telling myself that kind of feels like a poetic version of God of War. It's an interesting story with very interesting characters. The setting and the mood of the game makes the game worth it. Senua can hear voices. Not only does it set for creepy and mysterious vibes, the voices have a purpose. The voices warn you about obstacles when you're not going the right way or even when an enemy is behind you, preparing to attack. I found this really original and I loved it. Speaking of combat, there is combat in this, but you are mainly walking and solving puzzles. From time to time, enemies pop in a small area designated for combat, and the combat is just fine. You have light and heavy attacks. You can dodge, block, and parry. Everything is responsive. My only nitpick is basically the camera seems to have a hard time following the action. Sometimes it was impossible for me to dodge because either an enemy or an object was blocking me and preventing me from escaping my certain death. Since this game is mostly about puzzles, I have to admit some of them are very creative. A lot of them consist of finding shapes in the level to open a door. At first, they are pretty simple, but the more you advance in the game, the more they become harder, and they are pretty clever. The level designs are pretty much straightforward. There are a few mazes here and there, but if you light up fires on your way, you can find your way with limited trouble. The graphics are amazing for the previous gen, but I hope that in the sequel the game would look as smooth as the cutscenes. The levels either look gorgeous or really creepy. There's always something in the graphics either to impress you or make things eerie. And as for the sound, it is the same as the graphics. The sound design enhances the experience. I definitely recommend this game, and if you like narrative games where you're walking around solving puzzles, the combat is fine but can be improved a little bit.